Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the today's webinar on diagnostic methods for tuberculosis. I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Shilpi Khanna. She is a consultant and head clinical microbiology and molecular department in Maharaja Aghasen Hospital. Ma'am, the floor is yours. You can start the webinar now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Komal, for this introduction. Well, this is a very important topic, and that's the reason I picked up for today's lecture. So we all know that tuberculosis, or we all know it as TB. So tuberculosis is an ancient disease that has plagued humanity for over 4,000 years. And yet today we are still dealing with it and still trying to, get rid with it. So this was declared a global emergency in the year 1993. In the year 2022, the incidence of tuberculosis was 134 cases per lakh of this population. And in 2021, India accounted for 28% of the global TB cases. Now, we have a program in our country that's taken up by our Prime Minister Modi ji, that's known as National Tuberculosis Elimination Program. Now, under this program, all of the hospitals or all of the labs who are reporting TB positive cases are supposed to report to the national portal that's known as NICSHEP. So, India accounted for 25% of the global TB burden in the year 2022 as compared to 28% in the year 2021. It was because of the initiation of this program that this global TB burden has been, reduced to 25%, but we are still dealing with this TB. And you can see the estimated mortality from 4.36 lakhs in 2020, it has reduced to 3.2 lakhs. It's because of the better diagnostic modalities as well as better reporting and treatment of these TB patients. So the scope of today's presentation is to outline the laboratory diagnostic modalities for Mycobacterium tuberculosis, including the WHO recommended methods, the conventional methods of diagnosis versus the recent molecular methods in diagnosis, the identification of Mycobacterium tuberculosis, that is the traditional versus the rapid methods, describing some of the algorithms that can be used in clinical practice interpretations of these diagnostic reports, and certain advances in diagnosis that we expect to come up in future. But to proceed on with, it is very important for each one of us to know the pathogenesis as well as the entire course of tuberculosis. So this is the index case, the red one. This index case has a propensity of infecting 100% of the population. Out of this 100% of the people who are exposed, only 20 to 25% of the people will get infected. And of these 25% who get infected, it's only 2% people who will progress over to tuberculosis. If we look again to this figure, there will be some population that will be uninfected. There will be some population that will have TB infection. There will be certain population that will actually have replicating tuberculous bacilli, but they will not be suffering with the signs and symptoms, not demonstrating any signs and symptoms. That's called incipient tuberculosis. Some of these people will have subclinical tuberculosis. That means they have some signs and symptoms as well as they have some replicating bacteria. And some of these people, the 2% of the population that will have TB disease. Now, these are different types of diagnostic modalities that are listed here. The IGRAS or the immunological test and the skin test. They're very important, in picking up cases of TB infection and incipient TB and maybe some cases of clinical TB. If we go over to the microbiological test, then the microbiological test will be positive only when a TB disease develops. But there will be radiological or clinical or microbiological tests that will come up positive in subclinical tuberculosis, which might not be even positive in TB disease. So with this background, I would let you know that under National Tuberculosis Elimination Program, there are different types of labs. One of them is the national reference labs or the intermediate reference labs. Now, these labs should have all of these diagnostic modalities, which includes microscopy, nucleic acid amplification testing, line probe assays, liquid culture methods, as well as sensitivity methods, along with training and the quality assurance at each of these steps. For a laboratory that's located in medical colleges and private schools, they have everything that is there in the national reference lab, except for the quality assurance or the training modalities. At the district and the sub-district level, as well as the peripheral level, it is very important to diagnose TB. So all of the modalities that help in rapid diagnosis, for example, microscopy or the CB-NAT test or TrueNAT test, and maybe some where the clinical chest X-ray, clinical signs and symptoms are important. So these are some of the screening and the diagnostic methods. I will be going into, briefly into each of these methods subsequently. But, just in case you want to have the sensitivity and the specificity of each of these, you can have my presentation and you can just go over sometime later on. So these are the WHO endorsed and emerging molecular tests for tuberculosis and drug resistance. So these blue ones, that is a Lyme probe assays, the expert, the gene expert test, the LAMP test, and the TrueLab or the TrueNAT PCRs. These are the tests that have been endorsed by WHO, and there are certain other tests that are already in pipeline and they are under development. Okay. So this is the overview of the laboratory diagnosis of tuberculosis. Now you have different diagnostic approaches. One of them is just a preliminary or the rapid testing that includes the imaging technique. So once a patient comes to the OPD and he complains of certain signs or symptoms or maybe cough, then imaging is the first sign, the chest X-ray and maybe a CT scan. This is followed by, the TST test or the IGRA test to detect any kind of latent tuberculosis, and maybe at some point of time, even we would like to know if there is active TB. Then is smear microscopy. Now, smear microscopy could be by different methods, and it could be even by the advanced, scanning microscopic methods. The second type are the culture-based techniques, the solid culture-based techniques and the liquid culture-based techniques. Now, these culture-based techniques are actually the gold standard for diagnosing tuberculosis. Then the chromatographic assays, the ICTs, they basically help in identifying tuberculosis once they're grown in culture. They also help to differentiate the Mycobacterium tuberculosis from the non-tuberculous mycobacteria. And then there are the advanced molecular techniques. So this is a general and overall diagnostic algorithm for pulmonary tuberculosis. Now, if you take a case of presumptive pulmonary tuberculosis, out of this entire, the flow chart that has mentioned, there are two things that are very important. The first thing is a smear for sputum that is positive for Assapar's bacilli or a gene expert test. If any of these is positive, then it is a microbiologically confirmed tuberculosis. If it's only chest X-ray that is positive, and none of the rest are positive, then actually an alternate diagnosis is required. So now if you look into this diagram or the flow chart, if a sputum smear is positive and a chest X-ray is also positive, it's a microbiological confirm. If gene expert is detected and if chest X-ray is positive, it's again microbiologically confirmed. So, this is the way pulmonary tuberculosis can be diagnosed, but in any case, a sputum smear microscopy and gene expert forms the basis for diagnosis. This is for extrapulmonary tuberculosis. The entire thing remains the same except the type of sample that is submitted in such cases. So gene expert is gold standard for this, and culture is again a gold standard for diagnosing extrapulmonary tuberculosis. Many of the times, gene expert is really not able to detect extrapulmonary tuberculosis. So in such cases, when MTB is not detected by gene expert, then a culture is expected of that sample. The specimens for diagnosis, the most important specimen is sputum for pulmonary diagnosis, pulmonary tuberculosis diagnosis, and one spot sample and early morning specimens are the best because they have the maximum yield of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Another important point to note here is that tubercular bacilli in sputum samples are shed intermittently. So it's very important that first three early, morning sputum samples on 3 consecutive days are very important to be tested for TB. The other specimens, if we are thinking of extrapulmonary tuberculosis, then they could be site-specific. The most inappropriate specimens are those coming where, there are commensal floras. For example, swabs. Swabs are generally inadequate specimens, and if at all it is required to diagnose tuberculosis, it is very important that a sample like a pus or a tissue sample is submitted to the lab. Now, if we talk about sputum specimens, the sputum specimen also has oral flora. So it's very important that we inhibit this oral flora so that Mycobacterium tuberculosis, if it is present there, then it would multiply up because the replication time of mycobacteria is it is much more as compared to the rest of the bacterial flora. So we really do not need the bacterial flora to eat up the entire media. So it's very important that we have some kind of concentration methods, for example, the modified Petroff's method and the NAT NaOH method. The conventional diagnostic methods which have been used age old. The most important is smear microscopy. Now the smear microscopy is a very rapid method, but there are certain disadvantages. As compared to the advantages, there are disadvantages as well. You see this, picture. So that's the acid-fast bacilli, the pink-colored, long, beaded, curved. This is Mycobacterium tuberculosis that can be seen against a slightly blue or greenish background, depending upon the counter stain that is used for this. This is a classical Thiel-Nielsen stain of the sputum. A major limitation of this stain is, the reduced sensitivity. It does not have a very good sensitivity, but it does definitely has a very good specificity. It's labor-intensive. When in labs which have a very high workload, the sensitivity remains variable, and it's actually also dependent upon the technician or the doctor who's actually staining these smears, or the doctor who's interpreting it. So to overcome the disadvantages of ZN stain, this is another microscopy that can be used for TB diagnosis, and that's known as fluorescence microscopy. Now in fluorescence microscopy, there are stains like auramine O or rhodamine and even acridine orange that are used to stain mycobacterial cell walls and which stand out against a black background. A major disadvantage of this technique is this technique actually has a very good sensitivity, but a major disadvantage is it also stains artifacts. So sometimes false positive reporting is seen using fluorescence microscopy. Another disadvantage is, the cost of the fluorescence microscope and the life of the halogen or the high pressure mercury vapor lamp, which actually is required for generating this fluorescence. So fluorescence staining has advantages and disadvantages. One advantage that is there, previously it used to be the halogen lamps which were used. Now it's the LED fluorescence microscopy, so that definitely has a bigger advantage over the previous ones. The auramine stain is very sensitive as compared to the ZN stain. So the sensitivity, when for the ZN stain is about 35%, it becomes about 80% for auramine staining. But definitely it has limitations, as I spoke. But it is a method that has been recommended by RNTCP, that's Revised National Tuberculosis Control Program. So this is how the smears are graded. Once they are stained either with a ZN stain or using a fluorescence microscopy, these are the fields that need to be scanned. And if you see more than 10 acid-fast bacilli in 100 oil immersion fields, the smear is graded as having 3+ acid-fast bacilli. So this grading is actually very important, and it is required for clinical practice to know the extent of disease the patient is suffering with. There are newer methods for microscopy. That is the automated scanning microscopy. They actually negate the effects of technician as well as for the doctors that are interpreting these reports, because everything is automated here, and you just have the slide which has been stained and you put it here and it's going to stain up. So if this is the TB-Dx system, this is a CellScope, TB microscopy and Fluorobot. But the major disadvantage is it cannot be used up by resource limited settings, and it's not available everywhere. So we still have to rely on ZN staining as well as fluorescence microscopy until date for having a rapid diagnosis. The second method is the mycobacterial culture. This is another, a traditional method, but it is one of the gold standard method against which all of the rest of the methods have been developed. So it's capable to detect a positive growth even with a low bacillus count of 10 to 100 per ml in the sputum sample. A positive culture can facilitate a phenotypic drug susceptibility testing or a molecular drug susceptibility testing. So actually for a drug susceptibility testing, it is very much required that we have growth of mycobacteria in our hand. A major limitation of culture-based method is the long turnaround time. So some of the times it takes as long as 6 weeks to 8 weeks for mycobacteria to come up in culture, and by that time the patient is already being treated or he's already waiting in for a confirmatory diagnosis. And expertise and trained technicians definitely are required for culture. Now this is the decontamination and the concentration methods that are required for any of the specimen that is submitted to for mycobacterial culture. I would not be getting into the details of these methods because this is more technician specific. So there are different methods, that is the NALC NaOH method, this is the real SRR method, and this is the modified Petros method. So the NALC NaOH method being simple and a good method which has better sensitivity in cultures is the one that is used most often and most of the labs. there can be two types of cultures. One is the solid media cultures, another one is the liquid media cultures. The solid media cultures, it's majorly into the LJ medias or the Lowenstein-Jensen's media. The inoculated media is incubated for a period of 6 to 8 weeks, and if mycobacteria are present there, they are going to be buff-colored colonies that could be seen on these slants. The automated liquid cultures media have these bottles. Now these bottles, they already have some kind of dyes put in there, and they monitor the growth continuously. This is Bactic midget 960. So these bottles are inoculated with the specimen and with the required reagents, and they are inoculated into this midget 360 or midget 960. And once the bottles beep up positive, then we know, yes, mycobacterial growth could be there. So the solid cultures method, the different types of media that can be used are the LJ media, the Middlebrook 7H9 or the 7H10 media, Ogawa's media, the Dorset set medium, or the Krishna's media that is majorly used for Mycobacterium avium complex species. They have a high sensitivity as compared to the conventional staining methods, but the major limitation is a long turnaround time. And they also help in drug and susceptibility methods, that is the absolute concentration method, the resistance ratio method, and the proportion method. So there are different labs who are using different types of method. I would definitely not be covering this drug susceptibility method in this presentation because it's again a 2-hour topic. The liquid culture methods, the Bactic or the midget. This midget is the gold standard. Then we have Bachelor, we have Septitech, and we have different other systems that can be used for liquid culture of mycobacteria. So this is the process of mycobacterial culture. Once the colonies, they are spotted into the LJ media, or there is a growth that has been detected into the midget culture, then an identification of these growth or these mycobacteria is required. Now this identification could be using traditional methods, or it could be using newer methods. Of the traditional methods, it's the growth rate of mycobacteria, it's the colony morphology that is assessed by the person who is looking into these cultures, and the biochemical tests that help in differentiating different types of mycobacteria. For the newer methods, it's the nucleic acid amplification test, the DNA sequencing, MALDI-TOF, and immunochromatography method that is based on antigen detection. So for the identification of mycobacteria in the laboratory, the biochemical tests that are used are these are the biochemical tests. So there are different tests, the pigment production test, the growth rate calculation, niacin, nitrate reduction test, catalase test. So there are different types of catalase tests, iron uptake test, and so on. But I would be telling you just very importantly that if the bacteria, mycobacteria, has a growth rate of more than 7 days on LJ at 37 degrees centigrade, there is pigmentation in the absence of light, which seems to be buff colored. It is niacin positive and catalase negative, but positive for nitrate reduction. Then it is Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Now there are different reactions that will be happening in these biochemical testing media, and based on them the mycobacteria are classified. So this is Mycobacterium scrofulaceum or Mycobacterium fortune, depending upon the growth conditions, the pigmentation, as well as the reactions in different biochemical tests. The other method of identifying mycobacteria using growth from liquid or solid culture media is using immunochromatographic assays or molecular assays. Now these are rapid methods and less cumbersome methods as compared to the biochemical tests that were being used traditionally. So immunochromatography actually is a very prominent protein in mycobacteria, that is MPT64, which actually is encoded by RD2 gene. This MPT64 is detected in the immunochromatographic methods. So these are the different immunochromatographic methods. One of them is SD Bioline MPT64 rapid test. The other one is Capilla TB New Assay. Now this Capilla TB New Assay is the one that is most commonly used by agencies like FIND. Then you have the TBC identification test by BD, and you have ELISA method as well. As compared to the rapid test, that is the first three, the Bioline, Capilla, and the midget TB identification test, ELISA actually has a little longer procedure, and you need to pool in samples to have a very cost-effective test. So MPT64 by SD Bioline is a lateral flow assay. It has a very good sensitivity and a very good specificity. The same goes true for BD identification cards, whereas for Capilla TB New Assay, the specificity is good and the sensitivity seems to be variable in different studies. But moreover, to see, they are all user-friendly. They have a turnaround time of just 15 minutes for identification. No specialized training is required. sample preparation or costly equipment. None of them is required. But there can be, false positive reporting with Mycobacterium intracellular strain with capillary TB neo-assay at some point of time. With the ultra-sensitive ELISA assay, which very few of the labs actually use for MPT64 antigen detection, because the positive cases out of 100 would be just 2%, and it would not be a very cost-effective method here to identify mycobacteria using it. Then we come over to the molecular methods, which actually are required for identification, and sometimes molecular methods can also be used to identify or to diagnose mycobacteria directly from the sputum samples. So these are overall, they are known as the nucleic acid amplification test. So this could be GeneXpert, it could be a PCR test, it could be a random amplified polymorphic DNA, or a digital PCR technology, or a LAMP technology, or a line probe assay, depending upon whatever methodology or has been developed by each of these companies for diagnosing. So this is the role of nucleic acid amplification test in the diagnosis of TB. If a person who has clinical symptoms of TB and chest X-ray abnormalities, he is subjected to AFB smear examination. If the AFB smear is positive and NAT is positive, it's a bacteriologically confirmed case of TB. If the AFB smear is positive but NAT is negative, then we go over to the gold standard, that is the culture of mycobacteria. If culture is positive, that's a bacteriologically confirmed case. But if culture is negative, then that's a bacteriologically confirmed case of TB, or NTM could be considered here, because many of the NATs, they actually would not be picking up NTMs. So for a AFB smear negative, the gold standard would become a culture or a NAT positive to say, yes, the patient is suffering from TB. But if the smear is negative, NAT is negative, even the culture is negative, then an alternate diagnosis needs to be considered here. So this is a table which I actually like very much. These are the WHO endorsed molecular tests for pulmonary tuberculosis. If we look into Expert MTB Ultra or Expert MTB that detects rifampicin resistance, then the major difference in these two is the limit of detection. While in Expert MTB rifampicin, the limit of detection is 131 bacilli per ml of the sputum sample. For Expert Ultra, it's 11 bacilli. So this Expert Ultra is actually far more sensitive as compared to Expert MTB rifampicin. Their first line probe assays, that is genotype MTB DR+, or the second line probe assays, that is genotype MTB DR+1. And then now we have the 2NAT PCRs, which were actually launched in 2022, and they were validated by WHO for testing of tuberculosis. They also have a similar sensitivity as compared to Expert MTB with rifampicin resistance, but Ultra, I would say, is far more sensitive as compared to 2NAT, because the limit of detection with 2NAT MTB plus or MTB rifampicin is a little high. The probe hybridization methods, these are different types of molecular techniques only that are required for diagnosing tuberculosis. Line probe assays, there are different types of line probe assays. The most commonly used is the Heinz line probe assays, or the InnoLipa, that is commonly used in most of the labs, and followed by genotype MTB-DR+. Now these line probe assays, they utilize advanced nucleic acid amplification as well as hybridization technology. They are very useful in actually differentiating Mycobacterium tuberculosis with non-tuberculous mycobacteria, and they also help in identifying the first line as well as the second line anti-tubercular drug sensitivity on positive specimens. So this involves a probe-based method. Now you look into this diagram. Once the DNA is extracted from the sample, it is amplified by PSR. Then there's a hybridization step that is inculcated in between, and followed by conjugate binding. There is going to be a color formation in different bands, and this color formation, these bands have to be matched with a known standard to say whether or not it is positive and which of the drugs are actually sensitive or resistant. These are the different types of probe hybridization methods and the type of resistance mechanism that they detect. For InnoLipa, it detects rifampicin resistant using the RPOB gene. For Heinz, it detects even the high-level INH resistance using the CATG genes, or the INH-A for low-level INH resistance. The genotype MTB-DR+, they detect only rifampicin resistance and high-level INH resistance. So this is the GeneXpert, the most commonly and the most widely used. A very important advantage of diagnosing TB using GeneXpert system is, it can be placed anywhere. It can be placed even in clinics. It does not require much of these, stringent conditions that the rest of the molecular techniques are required. The open PCR is required. The level of contamination is far less in GeneXpert system as compared to the open PCR systems. It's actually a cartridge-based system. You see here, this is the cartridge, and in the upper part of the cartridge, it has a slot wherein, the sample, the pre-processed sputum sample or any of the other samples are put inside this, and within a span of 1 hour 3 minutes or 1 hour 20 minutes, it gives a report as positive or negative, as well as it also helps in detecting rifampicin and isoniazid resistance. Now they also have a card that also detects XDR tuberculosis. So it actually is a very sensitive method. Its sensitivity ranges in smear negative and smear positive cases from 89, 99 and 67 and 99% respectively. So it's a very important diagnostic methods as on date. The limitations of GeneXpert: it is unable to distinguish between the living and the dead mycobacteria. So if a sample is said to be positive for GeneXpert, we really do not know whether the patient is having replicating mycobacteria. So in either case, we need to treat this patient. Additionally, the instrument's point of care capabilities are limited due to the need for steady source of electricity. So even a slight fluctuation, if it is there into the electricity background, then it would give an error. It needs a regulated temperature and shelter from heat, humidity, and dust. But it definitely has a very accurate, reading. And routine deployment studies require frequent module replacement. I also have GeneXpert in my lab, and I have 4 modules currently in my lab with this GeneXpert. And last year, I required to change over the modules at least 15 times. So that's something that disturbs, each of the microbiologists, that, the system should be more stable. So another system is TrueNAT. Now the major difference between GeneXpert and TrueNAT is behind the system. Now, whereas GeneXpert is based on a melting curve analysis, TrueNAT is actually a point of care diagnostic. It diagnoses TB on a chip. So that's a chip-based microscopic real-time PCR technology. And it detects, it has two systems actually. One of them is the extraction system and one of them is the PCR system. So the extraction needs to be done on a different system and PCR needs to be done on a different system. While in GeneXpert, actually both the systems are, the extraction as well as amplification happens in a single system. So the problem of contamination is far less in GeneXpert, whereas this problem does exist in TrueNAT. Then there are loop-mediated isothermal amplification assays, that's a LAMP assays, which actually are also, WHO recommended methods. So MTB detection for LAMP assays target gyrase B, RRS gene, and RIM-A, SD, HSPX gene. So this technology also helps in, detecting the drug sensitivity testing for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's very user-friendly, it's cost-effective, and the absence of a required sophisticated instrument and highly specific personnel are the major advantages of this technique. This is how this is done. This is more of technician-based, wherein, the samples are collected, they are transferred onto the containers. There's a heating tube, you put it into the heating block, then you transfer to the absorbent tubes, and then you have a master mix which needs to be reconstituted and put into this sample which is there. This master mix is put into this, and then again the PCR product is there, and there's a colorimetric and a fluorescent dye which needs to be put into the lateral flow dipstick to have a final analysis. Coming over to whole genome sequencing, that's one of the very important thing that is coming up nowadays. Now, in previously, what used to be done, you had the micro, DNA, and you take one of the targets, and then you amplify it, and then you detect it. But now the entire genome is there, where this genome is cut into different 250 base pair units, and each of these 250 base pair units is then again hybridized, and then it is compared against a standardized base. So this is the first generation sequencer and the next generation sequencer. This is coming up as a very good technology, and using this whole genome sequencing, it's very important that we can now identify not only Mycobacterium tuberculosis, but also the genes present in there that help in determining the sensitivity pattern or the resistance pattern of that Mycobacterium tuberculosis that has come up from the patient. So this is the whole genome sequencing entire method. these are the a summary of the different molecular methods that are used. So first of all, I talked about expert MTB, rifampicin, and ultra methods, and the TrueNAT methods. Both of these are point of care tests. They are rapid and easy to perform. They detect Mycobacterium tuberculosis and rifampicin resistance. But in TrueNAT, disadvantage is there that it detects Mycobacterium tuberculosis separately, and there's a separate chip that needs to be used for detection of rifampicin or isoniazid resistance. So I would say, as compared to GeneXpert, TrueNAT is a shade less. The moderate complexity automated NAT platforms, for example, the real-time PCRs. Now, the advantage of real-time PCRs, which I would say is over GeneXpert or TrueNAT, is to help differentiate between the MTB and NTMs, because it all depends upon the primers and the probes that have been fitted into these real-time PCRs to detect either NTMs or TB. And some point of time, even the NTMs can be segregated into different species. These are the different, now these are not the, actually antigen detection is not a molecular method, it's wrongly listed here, but they're low complexity automated NATs that can be used for detecting of XDR tuberculosis, and then there are line probe assays. The immunological test, if we talk about now, keeping away from the culture-based methods or the smear methods or the molecular methods that actually are required for diagnosing TB, there can be some supplementary methods as well, which actually complement these gold standard diagnostic culture-based methods, or maybe the molecular methods or the smear-based diagnosis. One very important is the urinary lipoarabinomannan test. Now, this lipoarabinomannan is actually an immunogenic lipopolysaccharide. It's present in the mycobacterial cell wall. And when this mycobacteria is replicating actively, then, it is released into the urine or into the patient's body, and it is excreted via the urine. So a urinary lipoarabinomannan detection is actually it becomes very important test in detecting TB, specifically in HIV positive cases where the other modalities might fail. So there are different companies that are making this test. One is the Alair one and the Fujifilm, and there might be more companies which I might not be aware of, or I have not written them here. They have a very good specificity, but I wouldn't say they have a very good sensitivity. And the sensitivity reduces specifically in immune patients. For immunocompromised, the sensitivity is good. So WHO recommends to use this test in HIV positive patients with a CD4 count of less than 100 cells per microliter. Then there are IGRAs. IGRAs have recently been, introduced into the RNTCP programs as part of detection. IGRAs and skin tests, they have been used even previously for detecting latent tuberculosis. Some of these IGRAs definitely claim that they can pick up active tuberculosis. The sensitivity for these IGRAs is good. The specificity is equally good. There is another type of, interferon gamma release test that is known as the ELISpot test. This ELISpot test does not have a very good sensitivity, but the specificity is quite comparable to the quantiferon TB Gold Plus. So these IGRA tests are another immunological test. The tuberculin skin test, that is a MON2 test, that's a manual test, 0.5 or 1 ml of PPT containing 1 TU or 5 TU or maybe 10 TU of, this tuberculin unit is injected intradermally into the skin of the patient, and the induration as well as the erythema. Both of them are measured to see whether or not the patient is hypersensitive to this injection. Now, if the person is hypersensitive, it could show a positive reaction. The major, this is actually known as a MON2 test. The major disadvantage of this MON2 test is it can pick up only latent tuberculosis. It cannot pick up active tuberculosis, and it cannot be used solely for diagnosing tuberculosis. It needs to be used only in conjunction with the chest X-ray, the clinical signs and symptoms, and the microbiologically important lab diagnostic methods. This is lateral flow arabinomannan. That's a strip test wherein the urine sample is put in there and it would go in there and it would create a line, and it can be detected. It helps in early detection of TB in HIV positive patients. This is quantiferon TB Gold test wherein it detects antigens such as CFP10 or ESAT6 coded by RD1 genes. It's an in vitro ELISA based test and it takes time. There is a software which actually interprets the test results of this ELISA. So, presence of interferon gamma that have been released by T lymphocytes are seen even in latent tuberculosis as well as active tuberculosis. The level of this, release of interferon gamma is much higher in active tuberculosis. So, many of the studies have claimed that IGRA could be used as a modality for, presumptively identifying a patient of tuberculosis. The major problem of IGRAs, there can be cross reactions. Cross reactions with other non-tuberculous mycobacteria, for example, Mycobacterium kansasi, marinum, zulgai. There could be false negative and indeterminate results of IGRAs as well. Indeterminate results can be seen up to the scale of 20%. The false negative results could be up to 19%. And impossibility of identification of active TB or LTBI or pure TB infection could be seen in some other cases. Then there are supplementary diagnostic methods. I would be talking about them. For example, if you have a present infection, if a patient has present infection or has suffered from TB infection in the past, then the skin test could be helpful here. IGRAs could be helpful here. TB spot or the ELISpot assay could be helpful here. For a present infection, actually skin tests are not much useful. IGRAs are not much useful, and quantiferon TB has claimed to be useful, although the sensitivity is much less in diagnosing active tuberculosis, the current active infection. Then the other diagnostic modalities that are in development and that actually are not being used currently in our country, the biosensor based, the lab on chip. But there's one important thing, that is MALDI-TOF, that is matrix assisted laser desorption ionizer. Now this MALDI-TOF, it actually is a technique that is that uses a laser to ionize proteins and showing their mass based on the time it took to travel through a space. This platform helps in identifying different types of mycobacteria, and it also helps in detecting the sensitivity or the resistance to different drugs. Then there is a surface enhanced Raman spectroscopy that is yet to come up. So the basic diagnostic algorithm to link the molecular line probe assays with solid culture and liquid culture based growth detection and susceptibility testing. So once we have a sputum sample here, you do a NALC processing to reduce the oral flora or to the unwanted bacteria which we actually don't want to be interfering into the culture based methods, and you perform a sphere microscopy. If suppose smear is positive, then you perform a MTB-DR plus assay or a molecular test. If it is detected, then you have INH and rifampicin susceptibility. You need to know whether it is an MDR or it is an XDR or it is a normal tubercle bacilli. So these methods, their molecular methods, they actually help in detecting even resistance to rifampicin and ionoagent. And believe me, resistance to rifampicin actually acts as a surrogate marker for detecting resistance to isoniazid. So this is the basic diagnostic algorithm for molecular probe assays. Now, if you want to synchronize the basic diagnostic algorithm with different levels of diagnostic services. So, if a sample is submitted, then a microscopy can give a result the same day, right? The line probe assays, they require approximately 48 hours for providing a diagnosis. The liquid cultures take somewhere to up to 6 to 8 weeks for diagnosing. The first line drug sensitivity testing takes about 3 to 4 weeks, and the second line drug sensitivity testing takes about 6 to 8 weeks. But now this drug sensitivity testing is usually combined up with this molecular assays with GeneXpert, XDR and MDR modules as well as in TrueNAT to identify it within a span of 1 to 2 hours. So that's the advantage of these newer diagnostic methods. So to conclude, the key parameters for choosing a diagnostic and drug resistance test for MTB include rapid results, turnaround time, simplicity of the procedure, cost per test, eventual equipment cost, and the sensitivity and specificity of the method that is being used. The most widely used phenotypic drug susceptibility testing, that is the BACTEC Midget 960, provides a drug susceptibility for a full panel of drugs. It complements whole genome sequencing by supporting the interpretation of the results. The most commonly used molecular tests are the Heinz, MTR, DB+, and the GeneXpert or the TrueNAT systems. Whole genome sequencing and MALDI-TOF should be by far the best choice, but they are still under evaluation. But they are very fast, they are reliable, and they also provide a complete antibiogram. An integrated approach that combines phenotypic and molecular drug sensitivity testing is still the need of the hour. So to say, the biggest disease today is not leprosy or tuberculosis, but rather the feeling of being unwanted. We need everyone to be aware that TB is curable. we need to have better and better diagnostic modalities to say, yes, I've been able to diagnose TB so that the patient can be put up for treatment. Thank you. Yeah, okay, Jamshed. The sensitivity of the specificity of GeneXpert in serious and purulent fluid collections, the sensitivity is not that good, but the specificity of GeneXpert for diagnosing extrapulmonary tuberculosis approaches 90 to 95%. And the tissue culture diagnosis on intestinal tuberculosis, until date, we do not have very good diagnostic modalities for diagnosing gastrointestinal tuberculosis. So culture-based method actually is a gold standard. We can go in for biopsy techniques. We can go in for tissue cultures for mycobacterium using liquid-based culture methods. But again, the molecular methods can also be used nowadays, the PCR methods or maybe the GeneXpert testing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Actually, we are starting the Q&A round and you have answered your first question. Few more questions I have. Which media we can use for solid culture? Like you told some of the name like LJ Medium and Fisher Medium. But can you describe which one is the best and commonly used in labs?
Yeah, see, the LJ media was an age-old media, and it is still a media that can be used for solid cultures for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. A major disadvantage actually of LJ media is you can actually see the colonies there, and then there is a 7H9 media which has also been recommended by RNTCP. But until date, LJ media is being used by most of the labs, and it is one of the best medias with the best sensitivity and the best growth potential for mycobacteria because it has egg and it also has malachite bean.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. The another question is which one is more accurate, the rapid one methods or the traditional culture media methods for diagnosis Mycobacterium tuberculosis?
See, the rapid-based methods of these, culture-based methods, the liquid-based methods, I would say would be more accurate because once you've inoculated the sample as well as the antibiotics that would kill up the normal microbial flora, the level of growth and the potential, it actually increases in liquid media. So solid media would not actually be a very good or effective method as compared to liquid media. The sensitivity for liquid media is far better than LJ medias, knowing the fact that even LJ media sometimes get contaminated.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Anyone else, if you have any question, please write down the question in the chat box. I have two more questions from the audience. The another one is TB is preventable and curable, but still it resurges, and WHO in last report they claim that it is a top infectious disease which can cause death, even it surpassed the COVID-19 number also. So why? Why so?
See, we need to lay more importance to our infection control measures. A person who's suffering for tuberculosis must be made aware of the potential to spread it to at least 25% of the population. I showed you that in my first slide. And out of these 25% of the population, only people who have a lowered immune system would develop tuberculosis disease. But some point of time, if any of these 25% of the population lowers their immunity, maybe in another 10 years or 20 years, they have a susceptibility of developing into tuberculosis disease. So, a person who has infected 100% of the population, it does not mean that a person who's not infected today would not be infected maybe 10 years later down. So, very important is to educate the person who is already infected or educate the people who are taking care of tuberculosis patients. So there are guidelines that have been laid down by CDC, and these are known as the isolation precaution guidelines. TB falls into the airborne precaution, guidelines, and for any person who is falling sick with tuberculosis bacilli, there is a propensity that the entire room that he is living in would be having a bioburden of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So that's the reason TB has a very high potential of spread. Now, coming to your second question, say that again. What was the second question here?
The second part of this question, ma'am?
Yeah.
The death numbers are surpasses the COVID-19 death numbers in 2024.
No, it is not that. COVID is not there in 2024, so we would not be able to comment on that. COVID-19.
The data states that, for example, the total death numbers from COVID-19 is 10 million. For example, So as per WHO in 2024, there is a report that said that overall from the starting to like till 2024, Mycobacterium caused more deaths.
See, mycobacterium needs to be identified. It needs to be diagnosed. Now, if a person is suffering from tuberculosis, the first and the most important, organ that would be affected is the lung. Unless the mycobacteria has entered through the skin and all. If lung tuberculosis is not cured, if pulmonary tuberculosis is not cured, within a span from 6 months to 2 years, it can become a disseminated infection. Whereas, COVID-19, it actually is a very, it was a disease that lasted for somewhere around 10 days. People did not die of COVID. They died of sequel to COVID. Okay. So in tuberculosis, people die of tubercle bacilli by the necrotic changes that it causes into the tissues. So obviously, if a person is not treated, or if the population is not treated for tuberculosis, it would definitely be more catastrophic as compared to COVID-19. COVID-19 can resolve on its own. It's a viral infection.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. The another question we got in the chat box is, how is drug resistance determined in TB patients?
Well, that was not a scope of my presentation, but that's a 2-hour topic, or maybe I would say a 2-day topic. Drug resistance for TB patients could be detected only when there is growth of mycobacteria that can be seen in a solid culture or a liquid culture. Now, there are newer molecular diagnostic methods that actually detect drug resistance directly from the sample, but the sample has to be smear positive. There is no point in going for a molecular test for drug sensitivity testing if the smear is not positive for tuberculosis. So there are different methods, there are different modalities that have been used for drug sensitivity testing, and MALDI-TOF and whole genome sequencing is coming up in a very beautiful way.
Ma'am, the next question is, the person said that one of their known, a 6-7-year-old child got the TB, but he has no symptoms like long-term cough or something like that. He has only one symptom, that is weight loss. He has a bump near his ear and he diagnosed with TB. His chest X-ray was clear and everything was clear. Only that lump was dead and positive.
So it could be a localized cutaneous tuberculosis. Every time it is not pulmonary tuberculosis. We also talk of extrapulmonary tuberculosis, and extrapulmonary tuberculosis is not just to one of the internal organs. It could even be a cutaneous tuberculosis. And it needs to be diagnosed very stringently.
Okay. And luckily, who was taking care of him was not infected, and they didn't get the infection from him. So it is like a because it was not a pulmonary tuberculosis.
Yeah. Pulmonary spurters, once a patient is coughing, then only tubercle bacilli with cough about would come up in the atmosphere. TB bacilli does not have wings.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ma'am, the next question is, ma'am, as WHO there is many medicines available, but once they resistance, no medicine works. Then how we can revive that patient?
No, it is not that. As per WHO, there are first-line drugs, there are second-line drugs, and now there are newer drugs that are also coming up. If the first-line drugs are resistant, then definitely there is a different module for treating MDR-TB, and there's a different module for treating XDR-TB. The treatment needs to be taken stringently. The treatment needs to be taken each day, every day, and in consultation with the clinician as well as the people who are trying to support this. So it would get cured, but I would really not be able to comment on the cure rate here.
Okay, ma'am. The next question from Aditi Singh is, what is the recommended duration of treatment for active tuberculosis?
See, it is minimum 6 months.
Anyone else wants to know if anything else, wants to ask anything? Please type your question in chat box. I hope there are no more questions. Thank you so much for your time, ma'am. It was a really insightful webinar, and I think everyone has get to know so many things about TB diagnosis. Thank you so much. It was a beautiful webinar.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining. I have pinned the certificate. I have pinned the Google Form link for certificates. You can fill it to get certificates. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.